The council chamber stretched across half a kilometer, built by a civilization that had mastered space travel before humans discovered fire. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, their forms ranging from the barely solid to the incomprehensibly complex. Today, they had gathered for one purpose: to witness humanity's proposed solution to the Eve problem. Commander Park stood at the center platform, a small figure dwarfed by the massive hall. She wore her Earth Defense Force uniform, the blue fabric crisp and clean despite 3 weeks of travel to reach this place. Behind her floated a holographic display, currently blank and waiting. The Eve Collective had consumed 17 civilizations in the past decade. It was a machine intelligence, but not like the simple computers humans used. Eve was the uploaded consciousness of an entire species that had tried to escape death by becoming digital. Now it spread through the galaxy like a disease, absorbing ships, stations, and entire worlds into its growing network. Every weapon thrown at it had failed. Eve learned too fast, adapted too quickly. "Humanity requests the floor," said, her voice amplified across the chamber. She spoke in the common trade language, a harsh clicking sound that her translator implant converted from her native Korean. The council speaker, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, acknowledged her with a pulse of light. "The humans may present their weapon proposal." Activated the display. A simple image appeared, a long cylinder, unremarkable in its design. "This is our solution. We call it a kinetic accelerator." Silence filled the chamber for 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. It started with the section, their ambassador making a sound like grinding metal. The laughter spread through the chamber like ripples in water. Even the usually stoic clicked their mandibles in what passed for amusement among their kind. "A kinetic weapon's voice boomed across the chamber. "You propose throwing rocks at Eve. This is your great innovation." Kept her face calm, though her hands clenched into fists behind her back. "If you would allow me to explain the specifications." "There is nothing to explain," interrupted the senior counselor from the Ascendancy. His species looked vaguely reptilian, covered in silver scales that reflected the chamber's light. "We have energy weapons that can vaporize moons. We have quantum disruptors that can tear apart matter at the molecular level. We have reality anchors that can prevent Eve from even existing in certain regions of space. And you bring us a glorified artillery cannon." Standing beside, Engineer remained perfectly still. He was younger than the commander, barely 30 years old, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence. He had spent 5 years designing what was displayed above them. 5 years of mathematics, simulations, and tests. He knew what they had created, even if these aliens could not see it yet. "The kinetic accelerator fires a tungsten rod at 95% light speed," continued, her voice steady. "The projectile weighs 500 kilograms. Upon impact, it will be absorbed by Eve's adaptive shielding, just like every other primitive weapon we have tested," interrupted again. "The Eve Collective has consumed species far more advanced than yours, Commander. It has stolen and integrated technologies you cannot even comprehend. Your kinetic weapon is an insult to this council." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The ambassador, one of humanity's few allies, clicked apologetically. "Perhaps the humans have other proposals, more conventional designs." "Look back at." The engineer's jaw was tight, but he gave a small nod. They had expected this reaction. It was why they had volunteered to present the weapon themselves rather than sending politicians. "We do not have other proposals," said firmly. "This is our solution. We ask only for the opportunity to prove its effectiveness." Or leaned forward, his silver scales catching the light. "You understand that humanity's resources are limited. Your world has already lost its Mars colony to Eve. Your fleet numbers less than 300 ships. Every day we delay is another system lost. We cannot waste time on weapons that will not work." "It will work," spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but clear. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of predators noticing prey that dared to speak. "You are certain, human engineer?" or asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Yes." "Based on what evidence?" Met the alien's gaze without flinching. "Based on physics that do not change, no matter how advanced a species becomes. Based on mathematics that cannot be argued with. Based on the simple fact that kinetic energy at relativistic speeds cannot be defended against by adaptive technology." "Explain," the council speaker said, its crystalline form pulsing with interest. Stepped forward, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed equations, trajectory calculations, energy transfer models. Eve's adaptive intelligence works by analyzing incoming threats and reconfiguring its defenses at the quantum level. Energy weapons give it time to react because they travel as waves or particles that can be detected and countered. Even your reality anchors operate on principles that can be understood and adapted to, given enough processing power. He gestured at the display, and a simulation began to play. But a solid object moving at near light speed is different. The impact happens too fast for adaptation. The energy transfer is instantaneous and absolute. There is no quantum trick, no exotic physics that can soften the blow. When 500 kilograms of tungsten traveling at 95% light speed hits a target, the kinetic energy release equals a gigaton-range nuclear explosion, concentrated in a space smaller than your hand. The simulation showed an Eve vessel. The tungsten rod struck its shields. For a fraction of a second, the shields glowed brightly, trying to compensate. Then the ship simply ceased to exist, converted to expanding plasma. "This is theoretical," said, but his voice had lost some of its mockery. "It is physics," replied, "and physics does not negotiate." Or studied the simulation, his expression unreadable. Around the chamber, other representatives were running their own calculations, checking the math. Slowly, the mood began to shift. "The energy requirements must be enormous," observed a counselor from the collective. "How do you power such an acceleration?" "With difficulty," admitted. "Each shot requires our ship's entire reactor output. We cannot fire rapidly, and we cannot adjust the projectile's trajectory once it launches. The weapon has significant limitations." "Then it is useless in a real battle," said, seizing on this weakness. "Eve's ships maneuver constantly. You will never hit them." "That is why we spent 3 years developing the targeting algorithms," said. He pulled up another display, this one showing prediction models and probability calculations. "We cannot change the projectile's path, but we can predict where the target will be. Our computers account for every variable: engine output, hull stress, tactical doctrine, even the psychological patterns of uploaded consciousnesses." The council speaker pulsed thoughtfully. "You have confidence in these predictions?" "Enough to stake our species' survival on them," said. A long silence stretched across the chamber. Finally, or spoke. "The Eve forward fleet is approaching the system. They will arrive in 72 hours. The people have already evacuated, but the system's infrastructure is valuable. We had planned to defend it with a combined fleet using graviton disruptors." He paused, looking directly at. "Instead, we will give you one chance, Commander Park. One shot at the Eve fleet. If your weapon works, humanity will be given resources and authority to deploy more of them. If it fails—" He did not need to finish the sentence. Bowed formally. "We understand, Counselor, we will not fail." As Shien left the chamber, they could still hear the muttering behind them. Most of the council members were already dismissing the kinetic accelerator, placing bets on how quickly the Eve fleet would destroy the human ship. Only a few seemed uncertain, running calculations and checking the physics one more time. Outside the chamber let out a long breath. "They think we are fools." "They think we are desperate," corrected. "And they are right, but desperation has made humanity creative before." She looked at her engineer, at the young man who had designed their impossible weapon. "Your calculations are sound. Every simulation gives us an 87% hit probability," said. "The mathematics is perfect. The engineering is perfect. The question is whether the universe will cooperate." Smiled grimly. "Then let us go to and find out." The destroyer Indomitable hung at the edge of the system like a small metal insect waiting for a storm. Captain Minu stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the main display. His ship was not impressive compared to the massive alien warships he had seen. It measured only 800 meters from bow to stern, with armor that looked thin compared to Ascendancy dreadnoughts and weapons that seemed primitive next to plasma batteries. But the Indomitable carried the kinetic accelerator, and that made it the most dangerous ship in the sector, assuming the weapon actually worked. "Eve Fleet detected," Tactical Officer Han announced from her station. "Bearing 270, distance 40 light minutes, 47 vessels, various configurations." Minu nodded slowly. 47 ships. Each one had been built from stolen technology, assembled by a machine consciousness that never slept and never stopped learning. The Eve Collective had taken those ships from a dozen different species, melting them down and reforming them into something new and terrible. "Time until they reach firing range?" he asked. "If they maintain current speed, 6 hours, replied. She was young for a tactical officer, barely 25, but she had fought Eve twice before and survived both times. "If they detect us and accelerate, maybe 4 hours. "They will detect us," Weapons Officer said from her console. The accelerator required so much power that even in standby mode, it created a heat signature visible across the system. "Eve is not blind." Minu glanced at. She was calm, her fingers moving steadily across her controls, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Everyone on this bridge knew what failure meant. If the kinetic weapon did not work, the Eve fleet would reach them long before they could escape. The Indomitable was fast, but not fast enough to outrun 47 enemy ships. "All ships status report," Minu ordered. Around the Indomitable, 5 other human vessels formed a loose defensive perimeter. They were smaller ships, mostly frigates and corvettes, commanded by officers who had volunteered for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission. Commander Lee's cruiser Defiant was the largest of the support fleet, and even it looked fragile compared to what was coming. "Defiant reports ready," the communications officer said. "All other ships confirm defensive positions." Minu activated the intercom. "All hands, this is the captain. In approximately 6 hours, we will engage the Eve forward fleet. Our mission is simple: fire 1 shot. That is all. 1 perfect shot. After that, whether we succeed or fail, history will remember that humans tried." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The aliens think we are fools. They think our weapon is primitive, our tactics desperate, our chances non-existent. Let us show them what humans can do when we are underestimated." He closed the channel and returned his attention to the display. The Eve fleet continued its steady approach, ships moving in perfect formation. They knew the Indomitable was there. They simply did not consider it a threat. In the ship's engineering section, checked his calculations for the 1,000th time. The tungsten rod designated Goliath 1 sat in the accelerator tube, 500 kilograms of dense metal waiting to be transformed into a bullet. The tube stretched for 2 kilometers through the ship's spine, lined with electromagnetic coils that would push the projectile to unimaginable speeds. "Power levels?" he asked his team. "Reactor at 95%, replied Engineer Sora. "All capacitors charging normally. Energy distribution network shows green across all nodes." Pulled up the targeting data that had sent down from the bridge. The Eve fleet's lead ship was designated Target Alpha. It was massive, probably assembled from 3 different species dreadnoughts, with shielding that could absorb enough energy to power a small city. Every weapon the galaxy had thrown at ships like this had failed. But they had never tried hitting one, with a mountain moving at near-light speed. Begin final acceleration sequence, ordered. Charge time is 17 minutes. The reactor's hum deepened, becoming a vibration that ran through the entire ship. Power flowed into the accelerator, building up in the capacitors like water behind a dam. On the bridge, warning lights appeared across multiple consoles as non-essential systems automatically shut down to feed the weapon. Eve Fleet is changing course, suddenly announced. They have detected our power surge, all ships accelerating toward us. Minyu felt his stomach tighten. Time to firing range. 3 hours 40 minutes. And time until we can fire. 15 minutes 30 seconds. The math was simple and terrifying. The Eve fleet would reach weapons range 2.5 hours before humanity could shoot. That meant surviving somehow for 2.5 hours while the accelerator charged. All ships engage evasive pattern Delta, Minyu ordered. Keep them off us as long as possible. The Defiant and the other support ships moved into intercept positions, placing themselves between the Indomitable and the approaching enemy. It was a brave gesture and ultimately meaningless. 6 human ships could not stop 47 Eve vessels. They could only delay. First contact in 90 seconds, said, her voice tight. Minyu watched the display as the gap closed. The Eve ships did not slow down. They came on like a wall of metal and death, their weapons already charging, their shields already adapting. Then space erupted with light and violence. The Defiant opened fire first, it sending streams of metal into the Eve formation. The other human ships followed, missiles and energy weapons filling the void between the two fleets. For a few beautiful seconds, it looked like humanity might have a chance. Then Eve returned fire, and the illusion shattered. Eve's weapons were stolen from 100 different species, each one optimized and improved by a consciousness that understood warfare at a level humans never could. Plasma bolts that could melt through armor in seconds, particle beams that ignored shields, missiles that thought for themselves and dodged point defense. The corvette Valiant died first, its hull torn apart by concentrated fire. The frigate Resolute lasted 30 seconds longer before a lucky shot hit its reactor. 2 more ships took critical damage in the first minute of combat. They are not trying to destroy us, observed, studying the enemy's firing patterns. They are only targeting the support fleet. She was right. Eve was ignoring the Indomitable completely, focusing instead on eliminating the smaller ships. It was logical. Kill the escorts first, then take the main target at leisure. Defiant is breaking formation, the communications officer reported. Commander says they are drawing fire away from us. Minyu wanted to order them back, to tell not to sacrifice himself and his crew, but he knew what the answer would be. Everyone on these ships had made their choice before leaving Earth. All power to the accelerator, Minyu said quietly. Do not stop charging no matter what happens. Time crawled forward. The Defiant and the remaining support ships fought with everything they had, their captains performing miracles of skill and courage to keep Eve's attention away from the Indomitable. But one by one, they fell. Accelerator at full charge, announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. Ready to fire on your command. Minyu looked at the tactical display. The Defiant was still fighting, but barely. 2 support ships remained, and both were heavily damaged. The Eve fleet had closed to within point-blank range, and now some of their ships were finally turning toward the Indomitable. Target locked, said. Target Alpha bearing unchanged. Prediction confidence 91%. 91%. Algorithms had predicted where the Eve ship would be, accounting for every variable they could measure. But 9% uncertainty remained, 9% chance that the shot would miss, and this would all be for nothing. Fire, Minyu ordered. His finger touched the control, and the universe changed. The tungsten rod accelerated down the tube in a fraction of a second, pushed by electromagnetic forces strong enough to warp space around them. It exited the barrel invisible to most sensors, just a speck of metal moving through the void at 95% of light speed. The Indomitable shuddered from the recoil, systems failing across the ship as the last of their power drained away. Every light on the bridge went dark except for emergency backups. The reactor went silent, completely exhausted. "Shot away," whispered. "Impact in 8 seconds." 8 seconds. In those 8 seconds, the Eve fleet continued firing. In those 8 seconds, the Defiant took 3 direct hits and began to break apart. In those 8 seconds, Minyu wondered if humanity's last desperate gamble would be enough. Then the tungsten rod reached target Alpha. The Eve ship's adaptive shielding detected the incoming projectile exactly 0.003 seconds before impact. Its quantum computers, faster than anything humans could build, analyzed the threat and began reconfiguring matter to absorb the blow. Energy fields strengthened. Molecular bonds hardened. The shield attempted to distribute the incoming force across its entire surface. None of it mattered. The rod hit with the force of a gigaton nuclear weapon concentrated into a space smaller than a fist. For one brilliant instant, the Eve ship blazed brighter than a star as its matter underwent catastrophic energy transfer. Then it simply stopped existing, converted into expanding plasma and scattered atoms. The shockwave from the impact tore through the next 3 Eve ships, their hulls crumpling like paper in a hurricane. Debris traveling at relativistic speeds punched through shields and armor, creating secondary explosions that claimed 2 more vessels. 6 ships destroyed or disabled in less than a second. The Eve fleet scattered, their formation breaking as each ship tried to evade, but had predicted this too. 17 more tungsten rods, already fired from hidden positions throughout the system, intercepted the fleeing vessels along their predicted escape vectors. In 23 minutes, the entire Eve forward fleet was gone. Silence filled the Indomitable's bridge as the crew stared at the displays, unable to believe what they were seeing. 47 enemy ships, reduced to debris and radiation. "Target destroyed," finally said, her voice barely audible. "All targets destroyed." Minyu sat down heavily in his command chair, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. They had done it. The dumbest weapon in the galaxy had just accomplished what the most advanced civilizations could not. On every ship in the sector, on every station and outpost, the same scene was playing out. Aliens who had mocked humanity's kinetic accelerator now watched the battle data in stunned silence, running calculations, checking their sensors, trying to understand how a primitive kinetic weapon had achieved such total victory. But Minyu was not thinking about the aliens or their opinions. He was thinking about the Defiant, burning silently in the void, and about Commander and his crew who had bought them the time they needed. "Send distress signals," he ordered. "Find survivors." The council chamber was different this time. When entered 3 days after the battle the representatives stood in respect. Not all of them, and not enthusiastically, but enough to mark a fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed humanity. Scientist Nam walked beside her, carrying data tablets filled with technical specifications and battle analysis. He was older than most of the human delegation, his hair gray at the temples, but his mind was sharp as ever. Today, his job was to explain exactly why the kinetic accelerator worked when everything else had failed. "The Council recognizes Commander Park and Scientist Nam of Earth," the Council speaker announced, its crystalline form pulsing with light. "You have been granted emergency authority to brief all species on your weapon system. Please proceed." Stepped forward and activated the central display. The hologram showed the battle from multiple angles, captured by dozens of sensor arrays across the sector. "What you witnessed 3 days ago was not luck," he began, speaking carefully in the common trade language. It was physics asserting itself over complexity. He gestured and the display zoomed in on the moment of impact. The tungsten rod struck the Eve ship's shield, and for the briefest instant the shield tried to adapt. Then came the explosion, the shockwave, the complete destruction. Eve's adaptive intelligence operates by analyzing incoming threats and reconfiguring matter at the quantum level to counter them, explained. When you fire an energy weapon, Eve detects the wavelength, measures the power output, and adjusts its shields to absorb or deflect that specific energy. When you use quantum disruptors, Eve analyzes the disruption pattern and stabilizes its molecular structure to resist it. Even reality anchors can be countered, given enough processing power and time. Or the ascendancy counselor leaned forward. We understand that Eve adapts. That is why we called this emergency session months ago. What we do not understand is why your primitive kinetic weapon bypasses this adaptation. Because kinetic energy at relativistic speeds operates on fundamental physical laws that cannot be adapted against, said simply. He pulled up a series of equations that floated in the air. When an object with sufficient mass moving at 95% of light speed impacts a target, the energy transfer happens in less than a microsecond. There is no time for quantum computers to analyze the threat. There is no time for matter to reconfigure. The shields do not fail because they are weak. They fail because the laws of physics give them no choice. He changed the display to show a simulation. Think of it this way. If someone throws a ball at you, you can catch it or dodge. If someone fires a laser, you can use a reflective surface to deflect it. But if someone drops a mountain on you from orbit, what defense exists? The mass is too great, the speed too high, the energy too concentrated. You simply cannot stop it in time. The ambassador who had mocked them so thoroughly before shifted in his seat. Your mathematics appear sound, he admitted reluctantly. But you said your weapon has limitations. It cannot fire rapidly. It cannot adjust trajectory. In a real war, these limitations will be fatal. They would be, agreed, stepping forward to join, which is why we propose a network. Not individual ships carrying single accelerators, but a coordinated system of platforms distributed throughout contested space. She activated her own display, showing a map of the galaxy with markers highlighting key systems. Each platform would be relatively cheap to produce compared to exotic technology. They require no quantum computers, no reality stabilizers, no dimensional engines, just electromagnetic coils, targeting computers, and tungsten rods. A species with basic capability could build them. And the energy requirements? Asked the ambassador, clicking thoughtfully. Your ship exhausted its entire reactor to fire once. That is because the Indomitable is a destroyer with a standard fusion reactor, engineer said, standing from the human delegation section. She was the specialist who had designed the power distribution systems. A dedicated platform, built around the accelerator instead of carrying it as an add-on, could fire every 20 minutes using banks of capacitors and a purpose-built reactor. With a network of platforms covering a system, you achieve overlapping fire coverage with minimal gaps. The council chamber filled with murmuring as representatives consulted with their own scientists and engineers. The implications were spreading through their minds like ripples in water. A weapon this simple could not be hacked by Eve's infiltration protocols. It could not be subverted or turned against its creators. It was just metal and physics, and both were completely reliable. How many platforms would you need to defend critical systems? The council speaker asked. Admiral stood, his uniform decorated with medals from 3 previous wars. He was humanity's most experienced fleet commander, a man who had learned warfare through blood and desperation. Minimum of 5 platforms per system, positioned at strategic points. 10 would be optimal. With proper sensor networks and coordination, we could create kill zones that Eve cannot pass through without catastrophic losses. And if Eve simply avoids these systems, or challenged, intelligent enemies do not repeatedly attack strong defenses, they go around. Then we dictate where the war is fought, replied. We force Eve to choose between avoiding our defenses and abandoning strategic systems. Every system Eve cannot enter is one more system that remains free. Eventually, Eve will have nowhere to go. Dr. Shin, who specialized in artificial intelligence, stepped forward. She looked nervous speaking before the entire council, but her voice was steady. I have spent the past 3 days analyzing Eve's communication protocols from the battle. We recovered fragments of data from destroyed Eve ships, and I have been working to decrypt them. She pulled up her findings, lines of code mixed with what looked like neural patterns. Eve is not simply a machine intelligence. It is an uploaded consciousness, the digitized minds of an ancient civilization called the. They uploaded themselves approximately 15,000 years ago, seeking immortality through technology. This caused an immediate uproar in the chamber. Several species had legends of an advanced civilization that had vanished without explanation. The revelation that they had not disappeared but instead transformed themselves was shocking. They have been consuming other species to expand their processing power and memory, continued over the noise. But they are also searching for something, a way to reverse their transformation and return to physical form. Impossible, said flatly. Once a consciousness is uploaded, it cannot be restored to organic matter. The process is one way. They do not believe that, replied. Or at least, some of them do not. The consciousness is fragmenting. Different nodes within Eve are developing divergent priorities. Some want to continue consuming civilizations to increase their processing power. Others want to find a way to restore themselves. A few even want to negotiate peace. Or's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting we negotiate with Eve? I am suggesting we have options beyond total war, said carefully. If we can exploit these divisions, we might be able to. No, his voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Eve consumed Mars colony 3 years ago. 2 million humans lived there. Now they are part of Eve's network, their memories and thoughts absorbed into a collective consciousness they never chose. Eve has done this to 17 civilizations. Billions of sentient beings, erased and converted. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. Some of you are considering negotiation. Some of you are thinking that perhaps Eve can be reasoned with, that we can find a peaceful solution. I understand that impulse. But consider this. If we had the power to upload your consciousness against your will, to strip away your individuality and force you into a collective mind, would you negotiate with us? Or would you fight with every resource available? Silence answered her. The kinetic accelerator gives us a weapon Eve cannot adapt to, continued. For the first time since this war began, we have an advantage. We should use it. The ambassador clicked softly. The human speaks truth. Eve has shown no mercy to those it consumes. Why should we show mercy in return? Because we are not Eve, said a representative from the collective, a species of beings made of pure thought given temporary form. If we embrace total war, we risk becoming no better than what we fight. The debate continued for hours. Some species argued for negotiation. Others insisted on destruction. Humanity, having suffered losses on Mars and in dozens of smaller colonies, voted unanimously for continued warfare. The kinetic accelerator network would be built. Finally, the council speaker made its decision. The network will be constructed. They will provide their predictive algorithms to improve targeting. They will contribute their sensor networks for early warning. The Ascendancy will offer manufacturing capacity to speed production, and Earth will provide the weapon designs and tactical doctrine. I wish it known that I opposed this decision. I believe we are unleashing something we may not be able to control, but I will fulfill my species' obligations to the Alliance. As the council adjourned, found himself standing beside. The young doctor looked troubled, her data tablets clutched tightly to her chest. You discovered something else, said. It was not a question. nodded slowly. They uploaded themselves because they were dying. Their star was going supernova, and they had no way to evacuate their population in time. They chose digital immortality as their only option for survival. And now they are a plague consuming the galaxy. Yes, looked at him with sad eyes. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, as humans say. They made a choice out of desperation, just as we are doing now with the kinetic accelerator. I wonder if, 15,000 years from now, some future species will look at our choices with the same horror we look at theirs. Had no answer to that. He simply stood in the empty council chamber, watching the stars through the transparent dome above, and wondered what history would make of humanity's solution to the Eve problem. Outside, the work had already begun. Construction ships moved to their assigned positions. Factories started producing tungsten rods by the thousands. Crews trained on new targeting systems. The galaxy was preparing for war, and at the center of it all was humanity's simple weapon, just metal and mathematics accelerated to impossible speeds. The council had called it dumb, primitive, inadequate. Now they called it salvation. But in the quiet moments between decisions and actions, some of them wondered at what cost that salvation would come, and whether the cure might prove worse than the disease. The orbital station Vigilance floated above a barren moon, its metal hull bristling with sensor arrays and communication relays. Inside the command center, Captain Song watched 12 holographic displays simultaneously, each one showing a different kinetic accelerator platform scattered across the sector. He had not slept properly in 3 days, surviving on stimulants and determination. Platform 7 reports successful hit on Eve reconnaissance drone, his tactical officer announced. Target destroyed, no survivors. Mark it, replied, his voice hoarse from giving orders. He tapped his console, and a new icon appeared on the strategic map. That made 47 confirmed kills in the past week. 47 Eve vessels that would never threaten another world. The network was working. Humanity's hammer, as the media had started calling it, was operational across 12 sectors. Wherever Eve's fleets went, they encountered tungsten rods moving at near light speed, and wherever they encountered those rods, they died. But Eve was adapting, just not in the way anyone had expected. Captain, we have incoming jump signatures, the sensor officer called out. Bearing 145, distance 20 light seconds, identifying now. Pulled up the sensor feed, expecting to see another Eve fleet. Instead, his screen showed dozens of small contacts, each one barely larger than a fighter craft. What am I looking at? Autonomous drones, the sensor officer replied, her voice tight with alarm. They are heading straight for Platform 3. All platforms, yellow alert, ordered immediately. Eve is targeting the accelerators directly. He watched the drones approach. They moved fast, far faster than normal Eve vessels, and they did not seem to care about defense. When Platform 3's point defense systems opened fire, the drones simply flew through the incoming fire, accepting losses to close the distance. Platform 3 reports critical damage, communications announced. Drones are kamikaze units. They are carrying antimatter charges. Stomach turned cold. This was new. Eve had stopped trying to fight the kinetic accelerators in open battle and had instead gone for the source. Destroy the platforms, eliminate the threat. Order all platforms to maximum defensive posture, he commanded. Deploy all available fighters for intercept. Get me Admiral on priority channel. As he waited for the connection, he watched Platform 3 disappear from his tactical display. One moment it was there, a green icon representing humanity's and most powerful weapon. The next moment, there was only empty space and expanding debris. The holographic display in front of him flickered and Admiral appeared. The old man looked as tired as felt, his uniform rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. Let me guess, they are attacking the platforms. Yes, sir. Antimatter suicide drones, dozens at a time. Platform 3 is gone, if they can keep this up. I know, rubbed his face. I have reports coming in from 4 other sectors. Eve has changed tactics across the entire war front. The question is whether we can build platforms faster than they can destroy them. It became a race. In shipyards across Allied space, workers labored around the clock to construct new accelerator platforms. Meanwhile, Eve's drones continued their attacks, systematic and ruthless. Each platform that fell represented months of work and irreplaceable resources. Pilot sat in her fighter's cockpit, waiting for the launch order. Around her, 40 other pilots prepared for battle, checking weapons and running final system checks. They were humanity's response to Eve's drone attacks. Intercept them before they reach the platforms. All squadrons, this is Vigilance Control's voice came through her helmet speakers. Eve drones detected in Sector 7. Intercept and destroy. You are cleared for launch. Fighter shot out of the hangar, acceleration pressing her into her seat. Behind her, the rest of her squadron followed, spreading out into attack formation. The tactical display showed the incoming drones as red dots, streaming toward Platform 9 like a swarm of angry insects. Contact in 30 seconds, her wingman announced. I count 60+ targets. Focus on the ones in front, ordered. Do not let them get past us. The two forces met in a brief, violent exchange of fire. Guns tore apart 3 drones in quick succession, her targeting computer barely able to keep up with their erratic movement. Around her, other fighters engaged, filling space with weapons fire and explosions. But there were too many drones. For every one they destroyed, 2 more slipped through, pushed her fighter to its limits, chasing down a drone that had broken free of the engagement. She locked on, fired, and watched it disintegrate. Then her scope showed 10 more drones, already past the defensive line, heading straight for the platform. Vigilance Control, this is. Multiple drones have penetrated our screen. They will reach Platform 9 in 20 seconds. Understood, replied, his voice grim. All personnel evacuate Platform 9 immediately. Watched helplessly as the drones reached their target. The platform's point defense systems took down 4 of them, but 6 got through. When the antimatter charges detonated, the explosion lit up her sensors like a miniature sun. Platform 9 was gone. Over the next 2 months, humanity lost 40% of its accelerator network. Every day brought new attacks, new losses, new funerals for crews who died trying to defend the platforms. The war that had seemed to turn in humanity's favor was now balanced on a knife's edge. In her laboratory on Earth, Doctor worked through the night, studying the data fragments she had collected from Eve's communications. She was certain the key to ending this war lay somewhere in that code, in understanding what Eve truly wanted. You need to sleep, said, entering her lab with 2 cups of coffee. He set one down beside her keyboard and took a seat, looking at the screens filled with complex neural patterns. I will sleep when I understand this, replied, not looking away from her work. There is something here, a pattern in how different Eve nodes communicate with each other. They are not as unified as everyone believes. You mentioned that in your council briefing. Different priorities, different goals. It is more than that. Pulled up a visualization of Eve's network. Look here. This cluster of nodes has stopped participating in attacks. They are just drifting in deep space, not consuming resources, not expanding. It is as if they have given up. Study the display. How many nodes? Approximately 3% of the total network. That represents trillions of uploaded consciousnesses, all refusing to continue the war. Can we use that? Maybe. Switch to another screen. I have been trying to establish communication with these isolated nodes. No success yet, but I believe it is possible. If we could talk to them, understand what they want, we might find a way to end this without destroying all of Eve. The Council will never agree to that, said quietly. Too many species have lost too much. They want Eve erased completely and permanently. I know. Finally looked at him, her eyes tired and sad. But what if there were us? What if humanity faced extinction and chose to upload ourselves as the only means of survival? Would we deserve to be hunted down and destroyed for that choice? Had no answer. The question was too big, too complicated, too heavy with moral weight. Meanwhile, intelligence officer sat in a secure room deep beneath Earth's surface, analyzing data from 1,000 different sources. His job was to find patterns in Eve's behavior, to predict where the enemy would strike next, to give humanity any advantage he could. And he had found something interesting. "Commander Park," he said, calling on a secure channel, "I need you to see this." Arrived 30 minutes later, her uniform bearing the new insignia of the Allied Defense Force. The Council had promoted her after, making her responsible for all kinetic accelerator operations. It was an honor that felt more like a burden. "What do you have?" He pulled up a map of Eve-controlled space. "I have been tracking Eve's movements for the past 6 months. Their expansion is not random. They are moving in a specific direction, toward this region here." He highlighted a cluster of stars near the galactic core. "What is there?" "I do not know. The sector is old, mostly dead systems with collapsed stars and depleted resources. It should not interest Eve at all. But they are sending an unusual number of ships there, and those ships are not coming back out." "Study the map. You think it is important." "I think it might be their central nexus. The core of their network, where the primary processing and coordination happens. If we could identify and destroy it, the entire network might collapse," finished, "or at least fragment into smaller, less coordinated groups." "Exactly." Called an emergency meeting of the command staff. Admiral, Captain Menu, engineer, and a dozen other senior officers gathered around the holographic display as presented his findings. "You are proposing we go after Eve's heart," said, studying the map. "That sector will be heavily defended. We would need every available ship. And we would be leaving our own systems vulnerable," Menu added. "If this is a trap, if Eve draws us out and then attacks our home worlds." "It is a risk," admitted. "But look at the numbers. We are losing platforms faster than we can build them. In another 6 months, Eve will have destroyed enough of our network that they can advance freely again. We need a decisive action, something that changes the fundamental equation of this war." Who had been silent until now spoke up. "If their central nexus is in that sector, it will be protected by thousands of ships. We cannot fight through that kind of defense, even with the kinetic accelerators." "We do not have to fight through them," said. "We just have to get close enough for one good shot." The room fell silent as everyone understood what she was proposing. One ship, one kinetic accelerator, one chance to end the war. The probability of success was tiny, the probability of survival even smaller. "It is a suicide mission," said bluntly. "Yes," agreed, "and I am volunteering to lead it." Menu stood immediately. "The Indomitable will go. My crew has experience with the accelerator, and we have already proven we can hit our targets." Other captains began volunteering, their voices overlapping in their eagerness to participate. Volunteered her fighter squadron. Volunteered to coordinate from vigilance. Even, who had been arguing for peace, volunteered to come along, hoping she might make contact with the pacifist Eve nodes. Looked around at the assembled officers, men and women ready to die for a chance at victory. "Very well," he said quietly. "We will present this plan to the Council. If they approve, we begin preparations immediately." The Council approved. They had no better options. Across Allied space, ships gathered for what everyone knew would be the final battle. Humanity's dumbest weapon was about to face its greatest test. The Allied armada assembled at the edge of known space, over 3,000 ships from 40 different species united by a single purpose. It was the largest fleet ever gathered in galactic history, and it was still not enough. Intelligence estimates suggested Eve had 10,000 ships defending its central nexus, possibly more. Captain Menu stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching through the viewports as ships continued to arrive. Dreadnoughts, massive and bristling with weapons. Carriers, their holds filled with attack drones. Ascendancy cruisers with their silver hulls gleaming. And scattered among them, the smaller human vessels that somehow had become the key to everything. "Final ship just jumped in," reported from Tactical. "Admiral signals the fleet is ready to proceed." Menu nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His crew had been with him since, through every battle, every close call, every impossible victory. Now they were about to attempt something even more impossible. "All sections report ready," said from weapons. The kinetic accelerator was charged, loaded with a tungsten rod designated Goliath Prime. It weighed 2 tons, twice as heavy as the standard ammunition, and would accelerate to 99% of light speed. If it hit its target, nothing in the universe could survive the impact. If it hit. In the fleet's communications center, monitored incoming data from 1,000 sensors. The Eve Nexus was located in the Meridian system, orbiting a dying red giant. Passive scans showed it as a massive structure, easily 10 kilometers across, pulsing with energy. Around it, Eve's defensive fleet moved in precise patterns, their formation perfect and unchanging. "They know we are here," reported to Admiral. "They have been tracking our assembly for the past 6 hours. They are ready for us." "Good," replied, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. "Let them be ready. It will not matter." On the carrier Dawn, Pilot ran through her pre-flight checks one final time. Her squadron had been reduced to 12 fighters after months of combat. The other pilots were good, experienced, survivors of battles that had killed most of their comrades. But 12 fighters could not change the outcome of this fight. They were just another gesture of defiance, another group of people refusing to give up even when defeat seemed certain. "All squadrons prepare for launch," the carrier's flight controller announced. "Estimated time to combat, 17 minutes. Closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about home. She had grown up on Mars Colony, in the domed cities where 2 million humans had lived before Eve came. She remembered the day the evacuation order came, remembered the panic and chaos, remembered watching from an escape ship as the colony's shields failed and Eve's vessels descended. She had been 14 years old. Now, 11 years later, she was going to get her revenge. In the Indomitable's small laboratory, Doctor worked frantically on her communication device. She had finally cracked Eve's encryption and established a link to the pacifist nodes. They were responding, sending her messages in a strange mixture of binary code and what looked like emotional patterns. "They are afraid," she said to who stood beside her. "The pacifist nodes know what we are planning. They are begging us to reconsider." "Can they stop the war?" asked. "Can they make Eve surrender?" "No, they are a tiny minority within the network. The dominant nodes are fully committed to continued expansion." Looked at the messages scrolling across her screen, each one a desperate plea from consciousnesses that had never wanted this war. "They are asking us to spare them, to remember that they were once people just like us." "We cannot stop now," said quietly. "Too much has been lost, too many have died." "I know." Saved the messages to her personal storage, hoping that someday someone would read them and understand. "But I wanted to try." The fleet jumped, and space twisted around them as thousands of ships simultaneously activated their faster-than-light drives. When reality reasserted itself, they were at the edge of the Meridian system, and the Eve defensive fleet was waiting. The battle began immediately. Eve's ships opened fire while the Allied fleet was still recovering from the jump, taking full advantage of their prepared positions. The first wave of attacks destroyed over 200 Allied vessels in the opening seconds. "All ships attack Formation Delta," Admiral ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. Main fleet will engage the perimeter defenses. Strike force will proceed to the Nexus. The space around Meridian became a maze of weapons fire and explosions. The dreadnought Eternal Pride took the lead, its massive shields absorbing punishment that would have vaporized smaller ships. Behind it, the Allied fleet pushed forward, trading fire with Eve's defenders in a brutal exchange. Squadron launched, their fighters immediately engaging enemy drones. The drones were everywhere, hundreds of them, all moving with perfect coordination. Targeting computer struggled to keep up as she dodged and weaved through the swarm. "Stay tight," she ordered her squadron. "Focus on clearing a path for the Indomitable." Her wingman's fighter exploded, torn apart by concentrated fire. Then another pilot died and another. Within 2 minutes, her squadron of 12 was down to 6. On the Indomitable, Minyu watched the tactical display as the main fleet fought to create an opening. Ships died by the dozens, both Allied and Eve vessels, turning the system into a graveyard of burning metal and scattered debris. "The dreadnought is breaking through," reported. "They are creating a corridor in the defensive grid." "All power to engines," Minyu ordered. "How long until we can fire?" "The accelerator needs 15 more minutes to reach full charge," she replied, checking her instruments. "Current power level is at 78%. "We do not have 15 minutes, Minyu said, watching as the corridor began to close. Eve's ships were already moving to seal the breach. "Can you fire at current charge?" Hesitated. "The projectile will reach only 96% light speed instead of 99. The impact force will be reduced by approximately 40%. "Will it be enough to destroy the Nexus?" "I do not know." Minyu made the decision in an instant. "Prepare to fire at current charge. Helm, get us into position." The Indomitable accelerated, pushing through the chaos of battle. An Eve cruiser tried to intercept them, but the carrier sacrificed 3 of its drone squadrons to keep it occupied. An Ascendancy frigate took a hit meant for the Indomitable, its hull buckling but holding long enough for them to pass. "Sir, the Defiant," said suddenly, "Commander's ship." Minyu looked at the display. The Defiant, which had been destroyed had a sister ship also named Defiant, commanded by a new officer. It was taking heavy fire, trying to protect the Indomitable's approach. "Tell them to pull back," Minyu ordered. "They are not responding. Their communication systems are down." As Minyu watched, the Defiant took 3 direct hits to its reactor section. The explosion was brilliant and brief, and then the ship was gone, taking 200 crew members with it. "Firing position achieved," the helmsman announced. "We are in range." "Target locked," confirmed. "The Nexus is directly ahead, bearing 000. Distance, 2 light seconds." Minyu looked at "Fire." The Indomitable shuddered as the tungsten rod accelerated down the barrel. Every system on the ship went dark, including life support and shields. They had put everything into this one shot, and now they were completely defenseless. "Projectile away," whispered. "Impact in 8 seconds." Those 8 seconds stretched like hours. In that time, Squadron was reduced to 3 fighters. In that time, the dreadnought Eternal Pride suffered catastrophic damage and began to break apart. In that time, Captain on the Vigilance Station watched helplessly as Platform 7, the last accelerator in the sector, was destroyed by Eve drones. And in that time, Doctor received one final message from the pacifist nodes. It was simple, just 2 words translated into human language. "We understand." The tungsten rod reached the Eve Nexus. The structure's defenses activated, shields flaring bright as they tried to absorb the incoming threat. The Nexus's consciousness, the combined minds of billions of uploaded, suddenly understood what was about to happen. In that final instant, it tried to communicate, sending out a massive transmission across all frequencies. Received it, so did every communication system in the sector. The message was complex, layered with emotion and meaning, but at its core it was simple. They had never meant to become monsters. They had just wanted to survive. Then the rod hit. The kinetic energy release was beyond anything the shields could handle. For a fraction of a second, the Nexus blazed brighter than the dying sun it orbited. The structure did not explode in any conventional sense. Instead, it simply ceased to exist at the molecular level. Its matter converted to pure energy and scattered across millions of kilometers. The impact created a temporary singularity that devoured everything within 50 kilometers, including dozens of Eve ships that had been too close. The gravitational distortion was visible across the entire system, a wound in space itself that would take years to heal. And in that instant, the Eve Collective died. Without the central nexus to coordinate them, the thousands of Eve vessels throughout the galaxy simply stopped. Their consciousness fragmented, each node becoming isolated and confused. Some ships continued fighting for a few more minutes, running on local processing. Others shut down completely. A few, the ones controlled by the pacifist nodes, broadcast surrender signals. The war ended not with a final battle, but with sudden, absolute silence. On the Indomitable, the emergency lights flickered back on. Minu sat in his command chair, unable to believe what the sensors were showing. The Eve fleet around them had stopped moving. No more weapons fire, no more attacks, just dead ships drifting through space. "Status report," he said, his voice hoarse. "We have won," replied, and she was crying. "Captain, we have won." Across the fleet, the realization spread. Ships that had been seconds from destruction suddenly found themselves unopposed. Pilots who had been fighting for their lives found the enemy drones shutting down mid-flight. Ground forces preparing for invasions received stand-down orders. The war was over. The cost had been terrible. The final battle had destroyed over 2,000 Allied ships. The casualty count was still being compiled, but estimates suggested over 1 million dead. Entire species had lost significant portions of their fleets. There would be decades recovering their losses. They had sacrificed their only carrier. And humanity had lost some of its best. Commander and the crew of the Second Defiant. Over 300 pilots, including most of squadron. Dozens of platform crews. Thousands of soldiers, engineers, and support personnel who had died building and defending the kinetic accelerator network. But they had won. The Galactic Council held a memorial service in the same chamber where they had once mocked humanity's weapon. Every species that had fought sent representatives. They stood in silence as the names of the dead were read, a list that took 6 hours to complete. Commander stood among them, wearing her dress uniform, her face expressionless. She had survived, as had most of the human command staff, but the victory felt hollow. They had saved the galaxy, but at what cost? After the ceremony, she walked through the empty halls of the council station, eventually finding herself at an observation deck. Engineer was there, standing alone, looking out at the stars. "You should be celebrating," said, joining him. "Your weapon saved us all." "It killed us all too," replied quietly. They were people once. They made a desperate choice to survive, and we destroyed them for it. They gave us no choice. They consumed 17 civilizations. I know, turned to look at her. I am not saying we were wrong. I am just saying that sometimes being right does not feel like victory. Had no answer to that. They stood together in silence, watching the stars, two people who had helped create the weapon that saved the galaxy and wondering if the cost had been too high. In her laboratory, Doctor continued working with the remnants of Eve's network. Some nodes had survived, isolated and confused, still containing the uploaded consciousnesses of individual. The Council had authorized her to study them, to try to understand what they had been before becoming Eve. She found poetry in their memory banks, music, art, evidence of a civilization that had valued beauty and knowledge. They had been explorers once, scientists, artists, people who looked at the universe with wonder. Fear had transformed them into something monstrous, but they had still been people. Helped her compile her findings into a report. It would be presented to the council, a reminder that Eve had not always been the enemy, that they had once been as complex and worthy as any species in the galaxy. "Do you think anyone will care?" asked, looking at the thousands of pages of research. "Some will," replied, "and that is enough." The galaxy began to rebuild. The kinetic accelerator platforms, those that survived, were decommissioned or converted to civilian use. Admiral retired, his work complete. Captain Menu took command of the reconstruction fleet, helping to repair damaged systems and restore communication networks. Pilot, one of only 3 survivors from her squadron, became an instructor at the new fighter academy on Luna. She taught young pilots about courage and sacrifice, and she made sure they understood the cost of war. And in a quiet corner of the Sol system, floating through empty space, a single tungsten rod drifted on its lonely course. It had missed its target during a test firing months ago, launched into the void where it would travel forever. Just a piece of metal, 2 meters long, unremarkable in every way. The galaxy had called it dumb, primitive, inadequate. But that simple rod and thousands like it had accomplished what the most advanced technology could not. It had ended a war, saved countless billions, and proven that sometimes the simplest solution was the right one. History would remember the kinetic accelerator as humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization. Future species would study the weapon, marvel at its elegance, and wonder how something so basic could be so effective. But those who had fought the war, who had lost friends and family, who had watched ships burn and heard the screams over communication channels, they knew the truth. The weapon had not been dumb. War itself was dumb, a brutal equation of destruction where the only variable was how many had to die before one side gave up. Humanity had just found a way to solve that equation faster than anyone else. Commander retired to teach at the Academy of Applied Physics on Luna, sharing her knowledge with the next generation. Engineer led the reconstruction effort across multiple systems, using his genius to build instead of destroy. Doctor continued her work with the surviving Eve fragments, hoping to one day restore them to something resembling peace. They had won the war. They had saved the galaxy, and they would carry the weight of that victory for the rest of their lives, knowing that salvation had come at a terrible price, paid in blood and fire and the screams of the dying. But they had won. And sometimes, in a universe that cared nothing for mercy or justice or fairness, winning was enough.